Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. We are very happy that tonight we have yet another Facebook Live session with the scholars of South Ilahi. Tonight we have a very special guest, Shaykh Yahya Pallavicini. And the topic for tonight is Maharifa, the Doctrine of Knowledge. Maharifa, the Doctrine of Knowledge. Shaykh Yahya Pallavicini is President and Imam of the Corre's Italian Islamic Religious Community, one of the principal organizations of institutional representation of the Islamic religion in Italy, with a vocation for theological training, ecumenism, and intercultural education. He is a presenter on Islam at the NATO College in Rome. He is a lecturer on the Quran and its commentaries for the Master of Religions of Abraham at the Cattolica University in Milan, on Introduction to Islam for the Master on Science, Philosophy, and Theology of Religions at the Faculty of Theology of the Swiss Italian University of Lugano, and on Interreligious Dialogue in the Prevention of Radicalism for the Master in Economic, Geopolitical, in Intelligence Security of the SIOI, Italian Society for International Organization of Rome. Inshallah, tonight I will have a lecture with him, and then we will have a question and answer at the end. So if you'd like to ask any questions, you can refer to the number +65 8776 7706. Without further ado, we'd like to invite Shaykh Yahya to begin his lecture. Bismillah.
Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah. العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيبنا وقرة عيوننا محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Thank you very much, Abu Sufyan, for this so generous introduction and invitation to share once again a moment of thinking or reading or learning on some parts of the Islamic traditional doctrine. Last time it was the teachings of the masters on two very important subjects, such as how to be humble and how to be noble. This time we're probably trying to engage together difficult situation, which is really at the core of spiritual and intellectual religious duty and research for Muslims since they are born up to the time when they will be getting too old. It's a great pleasure. The third term, of course, from the revelation is actually Ma'arif, which actually is the term for knowledge, and of course sacred knowledge. And I will be trying to in somehow take some benefit from the source of some of the books and masters who have been trying to teach the doctrine or the journey of knowledge, sacred knowledge in Islam since the very beginning of the centuries, trying to develop the teachings of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Among these masters, I would like to quote especially Abdul Hakim al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi, Abu Bakr al-Kalabadi, al-Sulami, al-Hujwiri, and of course, coming closer to our times, the great work of Imam al-Ghazali on Ihya Ulum ad-Din, on the doctrine of science, so the Kitab al-Ilm. So these will be probably some of the sources who will be trying to take advantage of. The first point, which probably will be also my conclusions, is to be very careful on what is the approach, what is the goal, what are the methods, and if I may say also the teachers and the brothers and sisters during our journey to knowledge. The Quran mentions several verses on one side, of course, on the duty of knowledge, but on the other side also on being very aware on how a negative approach. I'm quoting from the Quran, Surah Al verse 102 at the end, when it is mentioned that and how bad indeed was that for which they sold their own selves, if they but knew. And it makes reference to persons who in somehow took advantage of knowledge, but not for the correct goal according to the revolution and the Sunnah. And so one of the traditions of the Prophet teaches us that we have to search for knowledge, but in the same way be aware of negative, dangerous, and not useful or unuseful knowledge. Let us refrain from of curiosity or knowledge which is not definitely needed for our spiritual, intellectual, and responsibilities during life. And to conclude this more cautious approach, of the master, Shaykh Yahya Razi, radiallahu anh, he suggests or rather invites his disciples to be aware of the company at least of three categories of persons who are superficial intellectuals, those are rather distracting you from truth and from true knowledge, and they are actually showing you ways that are not intellectually or religiously or spiritually consistent with revelation and with prophethood. And on the other side, be aware of brothers and sisters that might be ambiguous, might be hypocrites. And last but not least, be very careful of ignorance of ambitious false masters. This is according to Sheikh Muaz Razi's teaching. Now, to start with another quote from the Quran, I'll like another verse, a series of verses from Surah Al-Baqarah, which is verses 31 to 33, English translation. And Allah taught Adam alayhi salam the names, then he placed them before the angels and tell me the names of these if you are right. They said, glory to thee, of knowledge we have not none what thou hast taught us. In truth, it is thou who are perfect in wisdom and knowledge. Allah said, O Adam, tell them their names. And he had told them. Allah said, did I not tell you that I know the secrets of heaven and earth, and I know what you reveal and what you conceal? So this can be, if I may, a starting point of our journey trying to learn from the doctrine of Maharifa according to the Holy Quran. It is actually through this first moment where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives his knowledge, his sacred knowledge to Prophet Adam, and shows the knowledge that Prophet Adam needs to in somehow show as well, giving the sound and the correct name of all reality that manage as a servant of Allah on earth. And he shows this to spiritual pure entities with angels. So this is something which is a very symbolical dimension, because it shows us the hierarchy, it shows us power of Allah's will, it shows us the opportunity that prophecy can open and show in terms of knowledge of names, sounds, meanings, and the distinction between the true identity of different realities in the world and in life. And it shows, of course, as a negative possibility, what it is not. So there is no other approach to knowledge. There is no other meaning to the true reality of things, and there is no other sound for a sacred language that if I may say, the method of sacred knowledge, of intellectual insight can actually receive and understand. So this is in somehow a very beautiful example from the Quran of the approach on knowledge that we can try to consider. Now, having said this, actually, there is a second, and it will be probably my last quote from Holy Quran, which goes more deeply to something which is the more secret aspect of knowledge according to Islamic doctrine. And it is from Surah Al-Isra. It's the 17th chapter of Holy Quran, as you know, and it's verse number 85. And the English translation is, and they ask you concerning Ruh, the spirit. Say, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is speaking to his Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And he orders him to say, the Ruh is one of the things, the knowledge of which is only with my Lord, and of knowledge you have given only a little. This is end of quote from the Holy Quran. So quite interestingly, this quote shows us that there are different levels, identities, and also, if I may say, sides of knowledge according to the doctrine of Maharifa in Islam. On one side, everything is, of course, part of his knowledge. So Allah is the knowledge, and he has given knowledge only in a small dimension to mankind. So one has to accept that has a duty towards a limited dimension of knowledge we have in our own life. And on the other side, there is a illimited dimension of knowledge. There is a much more greater dimension of knowledge that goes beyond our own perception, control, and personal knowledge. So there is a ultra personal knowledge, if I would say, that is a miracle and a mystery on how and if a Muslim brother and sister can in somehow be connected to this link between the knowledge he has and the knowledge that goes beyond what he is. And this is exactly the science of knowledge in Islam, between the knowledge we have and the knowledge we are not. The knowledge that is Allah, and the knowledge Allah gave each one of us. The small knowledge to the bigger knowledge. And the small knowledge is part of the bigger knowledge. So one of the main rules in this journey, not to neglect what is small, what is exterior, what is it's reachable with what goes our personal capacities in terms of reaching his Allah and knowledge. So this is the complexity of the relation. How can we know what we are? How can we know the names of the things that are related to our being part of his life and his creation as part of mankind? And how can we link this small knowledge to a greater knowledge, which is the knowledge not only of the Creator, Al-Khaliq, but it's the knowledge of Allah. It's the knowledge of the master of the worlds and of the words. And so this is actually the discipline. There is a science to link and to go further in our knowledge of ourselves and to go beyond the knowledge of ourselves, reaching in somehow the knowledge of Allah. So this is the complexity of the discipline of knowledge. And according to some masters, it is also a transform discipline. So it's actually, if I may say, taking into consideration the knowledge each one of us has, but to consideration the ignorance that each one of us has in connection with the greater knowledge of the master of all knowledges, that is Allah. So the first thing the masters would teach is actually to be aware, be grateful for the knowledge that has given to you, that was given to you, but be ignorant, be consistent with the knowledge of your ignorance of the greater knowledge. And so you need to somehow free yourself your own personal knowledge in order to somehow discover and open not only your mind, but if I may say your heart, to the Lord of knowledge that is has created the world, has created realities, has created life and yourselves and mankind, but has something to do which goes beyond creation. So it's the link between creation and what is invisible, what is interior, what is greater, what is a spiritual dimension that is part but goes beyond creation. So to conclude this first point, for instance, Junai says that knowledge is actually the first knowledge is to know your own ignorance. And when you deeply know how ignorant you are on reality, Allah might show His knowledge even within yourself. So you discover His knowledge because He is showing His knowledge thanks in somehow to the effort that you have done on yourself to accept your ignorance of His greater reality. And so one has to be very clear that we are looking for knowledge of Allah, and we're not looking for our knowledge of Allah or for our knowledge of a part, an aspect, or a order, or a miracle of Allah. And we are surely not looking for anything that goes Allah, because La ilaha illallah, there is nothing that goes beyond His reality and His truth. And the very special aspect in this case is also given through the fact that in order to seek knowledge, one has to have in somehow the intention to see the Lord of see Allah. And the symbolic teaching of the masters in this is that we can be to see, or rather to recognize someone thanks to the reality that we have already him before. And what's the interpretation or the explanation of this sentence is that actually there's nothing that comes if it is not from Allah. So as we are coming from Allah and we are seeking His knowledge, when we will be eventually able to see his knowledge, to meet his knowledge, and to know his knowledge, we will be aware that this meeting, this vision, and this knowledge is actually in somehow the or rather the remembrance of something, of a meeting, of a vision, and of a reality that we had already met and knew since the beginning. And this is actually very interesting because we start from Allah, go to Allah, and actually the masters say we start from Allah and we go to Allah through Allah. But journey, the end of the journey, when we eventually meet and see and recognize his knowledge, we can it because it is exactly as it was at the beginning when we first met his sacred knowledge. So this is something may be symbolically very relevant to understand the complexity, but also, if I may say, the deep added value of a sacred journey to knowledge. We will be also going to some hierarchies or some methodologies in this journey, and we will probably seeing several teachers teach that the knowledge of Allah is also knowledge of his order, is also knowledge of his essence, and is also knowledge of his attributes. But we'll be going to that later on. What I like to say now, according to Al-Hujwiri's teachings, is that the term Ma'arifa, according to his teachings, has a synthetic and analytical dimension, or a axial dimension and a dimension. It is the difference between usul and furu'. And actual or synthetical dimension is as well a combination of interior and exterior dimension. And also be aware the analytical dimension of Arifa has an interior and an exterior dimension as well. So this is quite interesting because sometimes one forgets these two parts of Ma'arifa. And so to consider that the synthetic dimension is the interior dimension and the analytical dimension is the exterior dimension, which is not correct. There is a interior and an exterior dimension in the synthetic approach to Ma'arifa, and there is an interior and an exterior dimension also as well in the analytical approach of Ma'arifa. Just to give you an example, according to the teachings of the masters, the exterior dimension of the synthetical approach to Ma'arifa is the doctrinal preparation, qawla shahadati, which means that we need to also study and be aware of what is the doctrine of this journey. But on the other side, the interior dimension, synthetic part, is tahqiq al-ma'arifa, which means the necessity to have the way to be confirmed according to the truth of your approach to the way of knowledge. So you need to actually be helped in a confirmation of the consistency and the truth of how you are approaching your way. And on the other side, the analytical approach to knowledge is consists the exterior part in the rituals, prayers, and responsibilities in the world. And the interior dimension of the analytical approach consists in the purification of your intention, niyya. So you see, you have, if I may say, at different levels, with different approaches, in an internal or external approach, at least four things to try to combine in a correct way. You have to seek for preparation, but you also you have to link this preparation with affirmation of truth by your brothers and sisters and masters. And on the other side, you have to be responsible and be consistent with the ritual and religious responsibilities in your daily life, and in time be much aware on how in every moment you are trying to purify your intention. So as you can imagine, which is very closely related to the doctrine of every Muslim, but has a very, if I may say, more strict approach due to the benefits and to the goal of this way, of this tariqah, of this discipline for sacred and a more deeper and a wider knowledge. As I mentioned before, Maharifa, according to the teachings of the masters, can be divided into, according to three pillars or levels. Maybe the first level would be the level of knowledge of the essence and of the unicity, of the unique reality of Allah. So there is an essence of Allah, his spiritual essence, and the reality of Allah is He is one. And this is very important because the masters insist on the fact that there is no two gods. There is only Allah, the only Allah, and He has a spiritual essence. And this is part of the first level of knowledge. Another level of knowledge, which is very important, and if I may say, it really goes to the complexities of the responsibilities for Muslims, knowledge through the attributes of Allah. So in somehow it's how we can approach His knowledge through connection to sacred science, which is ilm. But it's also how can we be accepting and following and obeying according to His power, qudra. And how are we responding to our responsibilities according to the gift of life, hayat. And also, how are we framing and following His will and not our wish? So trying to somehow follow the light of irada, the light of his will, through different, at least three aspects which are very important in the doctrine of, which is sama, to listen. We have to develop a very rare quality in contemporary, at least in the West, how to listen. How can we understand and hear what and His prophets are teaching us? We have to listen. And the second one is we have to see. We have a vision. So it's in somehow following His vision, His enlightened eye on our is the connection with His word, kalam. So how His word is already the expression of His knowledge. So we can see through His word, we can follow his will through the gift of life that he has mentioned, and we can share in somehow the fruits of his power in giving us the gift of life through his will, while we listen to his vision and to his word of life through sacred science. Now, all these parts of or actions of science through his attributes might be so powerful if the Muslim believer goes forward in his discovery of the different situations of knowledge, that might bring him to the last point, or the last situation, which is baqa, which is being not only consistent, but being permanent in the presence of Allah. So you're not only not knowing him, but you are part of his knowledge of himself, which is something which is a very deep and, if I may say, maybe final situation of the journey to knowledge. And so we saw this last part was the knowledge through the attributes of Allah. The first one was the knowledge through the essence of Allah in his unicity. And the last point would be the knowledge through his order and through his wisdom. The masters are quite insisting on this point, because they say that your journey starts also world, and you are not leaving this world for a greater knowledge, but greater knowledge you might achieve, you can in somehow be part of a responsibility where your wisdom is the translation of his knowledge in your hearts. So his knowledge inspires his presence in your hearts and inspires your wisdom in your action and responsibility on earth. And this is only part of his will, his order. And this is the last of the three levels of knowledge. Comes from Allah, which is also corresponding Am I still with you? Yes. So we were saying that there are three levels of knowledge. If we already mentioned, one is the knowledge min Allah, from Allah. That means also you need to be consistent with a level of paying respect to every principle of divine revelation and of Sharia. But the ilm ma Allah, which means the part of the journey of knowledge when you are with in somehow or guidance with through the guidance of Allah, is obeying to is sacred science of the way. It's a alchemy. It's a very special obedience that it's not only through Sharia, but it's also through a sensitive dimension in trying to, in somehow not understand, but follow the inspirational insights of sacred science through the journey, which is not only a journey walking or running, but it's also a journey that goes beyond the dimension of life. And the last is ilm, which is also the knowledge exactly that can be followed through the example of the prophets and of the masters. This is, I think, something quite interesting that shows you the different points or of the journey. A master that we had already mentioned before, Junaid, also gives a concrete example of two different approaches to Maharifa. One approach is through identification. So when one is in somehow completely absorbed by the wisdom of Allah, and the other one is through education. This second process is a very important process because it's the way, according to Junaid, when a master guides a disciple to the discovery and to the recognition of Allah's power, of Allah's influence, of Allah's blessings in the skies and in the souls. Through the lutf, through this spiritual blessing, allows us to in somehow connect the outer world, the things, to the present. So there is a essential presence of Allah that we can recognize in all things and in all activities, thanks to this blessing of lutf, which is the mean through which Allah and His power and blessing links His servant to the discovery of His mystery and His knowledge in the skies and in the souls. And this discipline, the methodology of education, is the most widely taught method in many of the schools of knowledge since Junaid up to now. So all the masters and all the ways, all the turuk are in somehow adapting and renewing the skills and the means of this methodology of trying to educate and help the discovery of this knowledge through this dimension. And of course, this is part of all the journey. To go and to approach to our last part of this moment of conversation, Marifa. There are also other aspects which are quite interestingly interlinked. Masters teach that there is a knowledge that can be recognized according to three different approaches. One is through the language, or through expression, or through communication, which is the method of Rar. So how to declare, how to in somehow present, and through the language, your intention and your research for a better knowledge and for a confirmation true knowledge rather than a knowledge which is not needed or dangerous or correct according to your needs. The other approach is how to confirm truth through truth. So it's tasdiq. It's really in somehow the approach on trying to discover how to be more honest and sincere any moral or juridical or theological or philosophical guidelines, but it's in somehow a way of melting, if I may say, oneself and one's soul in the deepness and in the evidence of truth. So it's really a approach towards al-haq through sidq, through this deeper sincere hearts that needs to be developed. And the last one, of course, is the knowledge of the reality of through certitude, so yaqeen. So there is no doubt. There is no doubt. La ilaha illallah. There is no doubt. There is one Almighty Allah. He is the principle of all knowledge. When one attains and gets closer and closer to this reality, he gets in somehow a certitude of this kind of reality. Another quite important aspect that apparently contradicts what we mentioned before on the way through the attributes is that we need his attributes. We need a discipline of knowledge through education. We need learn, study, and be confirmed on how we can interpret or insights or inspirations by some specific situations and experiences. But on the other side, the very clear in saying that the confirmation at the end is that he is the only reality. He is the only truth. He is the master of all his qualities. Allah is the master of all names. And his names are in somehow the principles of all the names of different form realities in this world during our life. But there is nothing that goes beyond his reality, his quality, his names, his glory, his power, his majesty. And why are they saying, insisting on trying to reconnect everything to his unique reality and truth and knowledge? Is because it is the, if I may say, the part of the doctrine that is called bila kaifa. There is nothing that resembles him. There are no metaphors, no comparisons, negative or positive similarities or opposition that can be in somehow confused or associated against or in favor of his reality is his reality bila kaifa, with no other or no other way of trying to find this knowledge if it is not through his knowledge. So this is something quite delicate, because sometimes in other disciplines, at least probably in the West or in the contemporary society, sometimes they that we can have our own approach in order to learn or attain a certain goal. In this case, there is no personal approach. There is only an approach that can be his approach to guide himself and his servants to his knowledge. And this is quite an interesting point. Now, before reaching to conclusion, just let me give you a short example of a great teaching of, if I may say, Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi, which I was preparation of this conversation with you very shocked by learning, because it's on a debate through the centuries Muslim masters have developed on which is the link between within Islam of the doctrine of Maharifa for Muslims and for those who are searching for a greater and according to Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi radiallahu anh, he makes a comparison between two different situations or reality. The first reality is the reality of prophethood. So let us imagine that we are, as Muslims, trying to follow him as our prophet. But on the other side, there is another term, which is the opportunity to attain friendship with Allah. And of course, our Prophet ﷺ was both. In somehow was the Prophet, but was also a master of a very close spiritual link with the knowledge of Allah. So how to follow not both, but one and the other without confusing both approaches. According to the teachings of At-Tirmidhi, that everything starts through revelation. And the revelation has as a manifestation of knowledge the form of the sacred word, kalam. So revelation and kalam are linked. And what is the result of this connection when a Muslim follows the Prophet and his teaching of the revelation through his word is ruh. We are connected with a spiritual dimension of truth and of knowledge that is the essence of revelation, and that it takes in somehow form through the word, the sacred word of revelation in the Quran. And this is gives us the spiritual link to Allah's reality. What happens with the other approach? The other approach is takes into consideration not revelation, but the teachings of the Prophet. So one could say his sunnah, and of course one could say sunnah Muhammadiyah. Actually, Tirmidhi mentions as a term hadith. And he explains this term as very special teachings, which are not directly same teachings of revelation. So Quran was Sunnah, or Quran was a Hadith. So the teachings of the Prophet, different level of the teaching of revelation. But if I may say, according to the teachings of Tirmidhi, they both use one way, one similar way, which is the sacred word. On one side, you have the sacred word of Allah, which is revelation in the Quran. On the other side, you have the teachings of the Prophet. So the Prophet is inspiring through words some teachings that help his followers and the Muslim community to in somehow be helped to approach the knowledge of Allah's word through the teachings of his words. And so this the words of the Prophet, the teachings of the Prophet they not only, of course, confirm or help the spiritual link, but they bring sakina. They bring a certain peace. And this is one of the goals of teachings and dialogue and relation between master and disciple, between the prophet and his beloved followers, to in somehow attaining friendship, or rather friendship which is not, of course, what we intend in ordinary world. It's something which is a spiritual friendship, which means that in somehow you are part of a special love of that is only, of course, loving himself. Is not loving someone else. There is nothing else than Allah himself. His love of his reality, he is in somehow inspiring and helping some of the servants and of the followers of the prophet to follow this very language and this very special peace. So this is, I think, something which can connect our duty to be a consistent Muslim believer, and on the other side also to try to search for a greater knowledge, finding also ways that can be part of a friendship, of a spiritual love that can in somehow inspire deeper parts of our heart in recognizing the presence of Allah even during our lives, even during the journey, even during our responsibilities as in this world. My very last point, and I thank you for your patience before your question and answers session, is I would say a more careful remark. The masters I quoted at the beginning of this conversation, very careful, trying to take advantage of some of the qualities that Allah has given servants, but being very careful not to rely too much on a personal interpretation of these qualities. They stress qualities: intelligence, reasonment, inspiration, and intuition. These four qualities are considered as helps also for the journey to knowledge, but they can also be in somehow misleading situations, especially if one is proud of his intelligence and forgets what we were mentioning in the former session, forgets to be humble, forgets to be noble. So he is only in somehow self-satisfied of his own perception and interpretation of his what he calls his so-called intelligence. This is not the intelligence is needed to for the intelligence that is needed for Marifa is somehow strictly connected to the quality in fuqara, of being poor, of being somehow empty of any kind of selfish attitude, even a intelligent selfish attitude. So it's a different way of approaching intelligence, is really somehow participating through obedience and through poverty to his wisdom, to his intelligence. And so it's always a question servitude and not a question of selfishness. And the same thing is on logical reasoning. We need to reason, we need to reflect, to think, to try to understand, but we eventually, during the journey of knowledge, we understand that what we understand is something that is always greater than our personal level of understanding. Otherwise, if we ever think we are able to manage to understand something that is part of Allah's knowledge, we are in somehow abusing of our reasonment to think of Allah according to my personal grammar or my personal reasonment. And this is impossible because Allah goes beyond any kind of personal individual capacity of reasonment. Otherwise, we are in somehow other masters would call creating a using reasonment as an anti-metaphysical approach towards Allah, who is, of course, a spiritual entity and a spiritual master. And as well, inspiration, if this is on a personal basis, and it is not verified through brotherhood or through Sharia, or through masters, or through responsibilities and obedience, or the discipline of the way of Maharifa, it can lead to mysticism. It can lead to something which can be a very emotional interpretation of spirituality, religion, knowledge, sacred science, but actually it is not true. So be aware of inspiration, and the last one would be aware also of intuition, because according to the teachers I mentioned before, they mentioned that intuition can also be another way of being selfish in trying to attribute to oneself the power of knowledge without relying to any kind of verification or confirmation or request of help by a community or by a master or by persons who are more knowledgeable on complexities. So the four terms are very important, but the abuse or the misuse of these terms might lead to a confusion and to at the end to unsuccess. So you are not actually in somehow recognizing his knowledge, but you are in somehow searching for personal satisfaction of your own knowledge of the way of knowledge, which is not a journey, which is just a very personal study of the doctrine, but not the practice of the doctrine through the help of your brothers and sisters. I would stop here. I think I took more of the time I was supposed to, but I'm glad to learn from any of your insights and comments, and please be free for any personal development. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. MashaAllah, Shaykh. Subhanallah, that was a very beautiful lecture. We have quite a number of questions tonight on this very interesting topic. Shall we just dive into the questions, Shaykh?
Of course, as you like, please. I know it's getting late in Singapore, and my brothers and colleagues and scholars as Ustad Hasbi in Pergas and all the brothers and sisters, we need to rest. So I don't want to keep you too long.
MashaAllah, Shaykh. No, we have quite a number of questions for you, Shaykh. Bismillah. Interesting. Shaykh, the first question: what is the difference between Maharifa and plastic spirituality or popular spirituality that we see very prevalent today in society? Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is a very good question. I would say there is a great difference, but not necessarily one is against the other. The important thing is not to confuse one with the other. So popular devotional, emotional situations are part of one could say, a legitimate approach of a Muslim who is trying to find some help, and is trying to in somehow rely on the blessings of symbols or saints or prophets or situations that can in somehow also help his difficulties. In somehow the goal or the niyyah of this devotional popular situations are more concerned a personal or a worldly affair, something which is connected to this life in this world. While the doctrine of Maharifa is connecting this world and this life to the other world, but with a very clear priority and, if I may say, a doctrine of proportions. So what is above, or rather what is beneath, is part of what is above. It is not in competition, but there is a priority we need to consider. And if the goal is greater knowledge, it is not a smaller knowledge. So it's not a knowledge of the detail, but it's the knowledge of everything.
MashaAllah. Thank you, Sheikh, for that clarification. Alhamdulillah. Next question, Sheikh. Sheikh, you mentioned about the relationship of a servant with Allah, so the servanthood with Allah, and you also mentioned about spiritual friendship with Allah. Sheikh, how do you reconcile these two seemingly, different concepts of servanthood, but at the same time being a friend of Allah?
Well, this is something very difficult. I would not know. This has been a debate through centuries among masters and theologians and jurists, and there is no pragmatic or answer. I think Islam has given rules to consider and not to confuse one with the other. So the duty of being a servant of Allah in earth is a no discussion duty for all Muslims, men and women, in any century and in every place. So we have to serve Allah, but this does not neglect the possibility for some Muslims to serve and try to and somehow deepen the knowledge of a more close recognition of his presence in our hearts. And so this is, and so if we just think of when one thinks of his beloved husband or wife, you think that your husband or your wife is in your heart, and you feel that, of course, you love your husband and you love your wife, and you are close to him or to her, and you are so close through this love to him or to her, that in somehow, although you are husbands and wives, you are, if I may say, spiritually friends. And this has nothing to do with your duties as an employee or as a citizen or as a professional, and this spiritual friendship it can also go beyond the family relationship, and so spiritually speaking, when you serve Allah, you might also open yourself to discover that he is close to you, and you might be somehow in love with this closeness. So trying to develop or being closer to Allah is never in opposition to your duty to serve him. So you have to serve him, but you might also be part of his inner love. I hope this is clear.
MashaAllah. Thank you, Sheikh, for that clarification. Alhamdulillah. Sheikh, next question is on, you mentioned about the importance of the master and the disciple relationship, and how there is a verification of the ma'rifah or the knowledge that one has through obedience to Allah, through Sharia, through responsibilities. Could you explain to us why is it so important that one has this master and disciple relationship in attaining ma'rifah?
Well, it is very important. It is very important because in somehow remembering the quotes from the Quran that I tried to select for this conversation, in somehow it goes to a symbolic narrative between Allah and his angels, Allah and his prophet Adam, Adam and the angels of Allah. So there is a circular hierarchy in transmitting the knowledge and in transmitting the majesty of things, of names, and so one cannot skip this this hierarchy, and one needs to somehow rely to the angels or to the prophets in order to learn and have a more clear and true vision and knowledge of Allah. And of course, within Islam, this is exactly the dimension that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had with his disciples. He was a man among mankind, but he was elected among mankind as someone who was selected for a very special purpose. This purpose, on one side, was being the seal of prophecy. So he's Khatim al-Anbiya. And so as such, he was also a messenger of truth for mankind. And this truth has been acknowledged by the Muslim Ummah from his lifetime to his lifetime now. So, but on the other side, among all his ummah, you can find companions, persons, if I may say, like his four caliphs, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, but also Ali radiallahu anhu, who have developed special obedience towards the Prophet in trying to taste the deeper dimension of his teachings, not only as a service for caliphate, for our responsibility in life, but already in somehow living for a knowledge according to the higher world, to the hereafter. And this relation that was, according to some narratives, also the relation that the Prophet ﷺ had with Ahl Sufa in Medina Munawwara, was a very special relation of love, of teaching, but also of knowledge. And so one cannot be the master of himself, especially if I may say in the West. One needs to accept the gift of Allah that a person can represent the occasion for his being guided. Because it is worse to be misguided by oneself than not to rely on a person that might find ways to inspire or to help or to facilitate the interior development of his disciples. So, and somehow the tradition is this one, and the goal I think is actually to try to disciplinate to manage the complexities of this very important way of knowledge.
Thank you, Sheikh. Sheikh, next question is on the idea of a litmus test for Ma'rifah, Sheikh. Sheikh, a person could claim that they have marifa, or something of that sort. But what would you say would be a litmus test for marifa? Like, for example, like some people say, if you have good adab, that is a good sign, because someone might think that they have a lot of marifa, they have a lot of knowledge, but it doesn't show in their character, in their nobility, like you mentioned, and in how they are with other people. So how can one check oneself, or what kind of mirror can one use to check on oneself? And how can we reflect on this? Yeah.
Well, this is a difficult question because it is true that in our times we can find, as you mentioned, persons who are pretending to have knowledge and they do not have knowledge, or they learned the lesson of knowledge, but they are actually not practicing knowledge. Or, as you mentioned, they might behave not according to adab or according to the behavior of the Prophet, and so, or if I may say, even they might even behave very much as if the Prophet would behaving in this way, but they are not so consistent. So it is not easy. I would say that in contemporary times, it depends, of course, from case to case, because we are in a situation where there is not one rule for any place and any time, because there are so many different needs in terms of the spiritual needs of every person in the West or in the East, or in every different situation. But of course, one has to be at least reliable, as the Prophet was Al-Amin. So one has to be reliable, at least at the extent that the disciple can trust him as his master. So reliability and trust can be very difficult, but quite important measures, if I may say. The problem is that on a personal capacity, one has difficulties to recognize analytically if a master or if a disciple is trustworthy, or if he is or she is reliable. So at the end, I think one needs to pray that this relation might be helpful for his spiritual needs, and rely on Allah and on His wisdom, because at the end, neither the master nor the disciple can actually act as if they have a certitude on a methodology. It's not a personal methodology. It's a spiritual service and a discipline. And so in this way, maybe the best way is to try to pray together that Allah might help through this relation also the success of attaining knowledge. But it's an important but a very difficult situation, especially in contemporary times.
Sure. Thank you, Sheikh. Sheikh, next question. You mentioned something very interesting. You mentioned about there is a relationship between Ma'rifah and the intelligence of the fuqara, which is to be empty of any kind of selfish attitude. I find it very interesting because you mentioned that you can be intelligent but have a selfish attitude. And and obedience and poverty to Allah is the way for the seeker. So Sheikh, could you elaborate on how one could embody this form of intelligence of the fuqara? Yeah.
Yes, this is very important. I thank you. I'll try to answer, but this is part, of course, of our own challenge and struggles. To give you an example from the country I'm coming from the West, from Europe, the conception of being poor is seen as a very negative aspect,
Mm.
because in Western contemporary society, one has the ambition to become rich, because rich is equal to success, while poor is equal to unsuccess. So this already creates a difficulty. And on the other side, intelligence is too often linked, again in the West, to competence, to
Mm.
skills.
MashaAllah.
So one is very skillful, and so he is very intelligent.
Mm.
One knows all the know-hows of every discipline and science and methodology, and he's very intelligent. And if he does not know all these know-hows, and if he does not have all these skills, and he did not go to school and does not have a diploma, then he is not intelligent. I'm saying this because, spiritually speaking, in the journey of Maharifa, this is completely wrong. So Maharifa, to be poor is
Mm.
really in somehow to find a traditional spiritual way to know, but not being selfish, and not
MashaAllah.
linking intelligence to anything. So in order not to link your success or your intelligence to anything, you have to recognize your ignorance without being shameful of your ignorance. It's not a question of being having a moral judgment on
Mm.
your ignorance, or on your being not wealthy or poor. It's not a moral or a material judgment. It's a question of a spiritual priority. Now, it's exactly, if I may say, as the ritual of Ramadan.
Okay.
You are fasting in order to empty your and refrain yourself from yourself.
Allah.
So it's not a diet, and you're not thinking of being fat or being slim.
Mm.
If you refrain from yourself and you empty yourself of yourself,
Allah.
according to the teachings of the masters, you recognize the presence of Allah that is within yourself since the beginning of
MashaAllah.
yourself. Uh,
MashaAllah.
and in this way, you share His intelligence, and you act through His wisdom, and you are rich. أنت الغني,
Mm.
the Fuqara mentions, you are the rich, you are the person who, you are the reality that are as independent by any material need. This is al-ghani. And the Fuqara love to discover the presence of al-ghaniya in themselves. So,
Mm.
of course, when they discover this, they realize, if I may say, two different realities that are interconnected. On one side, they realize the deepness of being fuqara, so they are deeply fakir, so they are poor, but in the same time, as much as they are poor, they discover his richness, al-ghani.
Mm.
And this way has nothing to do with material or professional expertise or responsibilities. One can be, this is very important, one can
Mm.
be a knowledged person, but and also rich, or poor, or happy or sad. We have examples of persons who are Arif Billah that have been successful also in exterior, or in small, or in family, or in big situations. So one should not link one example or one experience to the doctrine of faqr or to the doctrine of wisdom, but to try rather to see how this poor master is intelligent, and how this important master is poor, and see and link and see and recognize if I may say, the alchemy of Allah's gifts in the different ways and approaches of persons in the journey of knowledge. I hope this was quite clear. It's a very important question, and I hope it was not too complicated, but very important.
Thank you, Sheikh. Alhamdulillah, we have a quite a number of questions. Sheikh, next question. You mentioned something very interesting. You mentioned about sama and the importance of developing this ability to listen. And also you mentioned about vision, to see with Allah. You know, we have to see with the sight of Allah and to follow this vision. Sheikh, could you explain, or rather help us to understand, like, how does one in this day and age, when we are bombarded with so much distraction and the ego's need to always talk rather than listen, how do we develop and cultivate a sense of listening and sama? Yeah.
Well, I would not know how to answer. Well, I think the only thing is we have to listen. There is no. We have to refrain from. If I may say, thank you for the question, but it's not only a question of speaking or being distracted or wanting to teach, but it's also a question of refraining. Once again, it's what I mentioned before, I think. This way, Tariqa Muhammadiyya consists on an approach which is refraining from oneself. And in refraining from oneself means that you are not following your instincts, your skills, or your thoughts. You are actually refraining from your thoughts, from your skills, and from your instincts, and trying to discover and to travel, following what can be helpful for this journey. So there's no way where mentally we can teach ourselves or learn how to refrain from speaking or thinking. We should just try, Bismillah, to listen, as you mentioned, or and then doing this first step, maybe we will discover the 99 steps of Allah, where He teaches us through silence, through words, through deeds, through behaviors, through signs, His science. I think there's not much that can be taught there. And sometimes one has to really be practical. And in this case, masters would say, be obedient. Do as you have to do. There's nothing to think about before doing. It's really when the angel orders according to divine's will, Iqra, you have to read. There's nothing else you have to do. So read and do not be too much concentrated on details. Am I able to read? I don't understand what I read. I don't know Arabic. Is this a spiritual, symbolical language? One has to really just read and let Allah's word inspire your soul and your heart. I think this is the essential teaching, if I may.
MashaAllah. Thank you, Sheikh. Sheikh, the next question, I wanted to scope it back to contemporary society, where it's prevalent that there will be a dichotomy between the genders, male and female, masculine and feminine. However, in the Islamic tradition, they mention a lot on we are souls. We are not recognized by these physical attributes, and that women should compete with men in seeking knowledge, and both are equally able to attain Maharifa. Could you help elaborate on this, Sheikh? Yeah.
I can try, but I think that the question is very, very well formulated. It is true that in the West, in modern times, there has been a speculation on gender issues, where psychological personalities, masculine or or feminine are taken as models for freedom of expression or for a personal satisfaction. This is something that has nothing to do with any kind of traditional and religious doctrine. So as you mentioned, and the Quran states this, we have created men and female from one nafs, from one soul. And so there is again, the concentration should be on this competing, as you mentioned, but rather on this common quest for knowledge that can be, as you mentioned very correctly, attained by men or women. Because if we have to go beyond ourselves, that means that we have to also go in somehow beyond our personal, physical, gender features, and rather discover the mystery and the alchemy again of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created a soul with a masculine and a feminine element in the same soul. And this is a great occasion of unity in diversity, in considering positive and negative aspects without associating one aspect to a positive one and another aspect to a negative one. But in this bipolarization, in this complementarity of masculine and feminine sensitivities, we can find a way to find a balance in our soul and a more stable approach towards the vertical, axial, and spiritual dimension of spiritual knowledge. This is quite important. Otherwise, if one believes that he's going to become an Arif as a man or as a woman or as a Italian or as a Indonesian, this is confusing cultural, gender, or professional identities with something which is a metaphysical discipline. And so we have to rather link the masculine and the feminine and the local and the global situations, the principles, and so connect what we see with who has shown us reality. And who has shown us reality is Allah. And so we have to, at the end, remember Allah and not remember my masculinity or her femininity.
MashaAllah. Thank you for that clarification, Shaykh. Shaykh, inshallah, this question will be the last question for tonight. Before we ask for your closing dua. So we have one more question, inshallah. So Shaykh, this is the question regards to the removal of confusion. Because in contemporary society, there are so many philosophies, there's so many isms. You know, it can confuse a lot of seekers out there in the quest for Maharifa and knowledge and becoming a more ennobled and dignified human being. Shaykh, what kind of advice would you give for seekers out there to avoid such a confusion and purify the knowledge that they have?
Oh, thank you. This is a very important question. I would not think that this is something needed for you in Singapore and in Southeast Asia. This is mostly an issue for Westerners that are very mentally oriented. But yes, you are right. There are many isms that have been and somehow proposed in these last centuries. I remember my father and master, Shaykh Abdul Wahid, radiallahu anhu, who was somehow inspired by a French Muslim convert, René Guénon, Shaykh Abdul Wahid Yahya, radiallahu anhu, who died in Cairo in 1951. And actually, I think somehow Shaykh Abdul Wahid Yahya, René Guénon, has helped many Westerners to rediscover a grammar of, if I may say, traditional intellectual approach to sacred science. Because as you well mentioned, in Europe, for centuries, pseudo-philosophies have confused the rules of grammar of sacred science.
Allah.
First, they have neglected any possibility of true knowledge. And secondly, they have confused some categories, terms, methodologies with intentions for selfish philosophical ambition and satisfaction. So, and at the end, all philosophies are now competing one against the other, just for a ideological personal purpose rather than for any concrete material or social or humanitarian need. So this is actually the case, and in somehow I think that the works of Sheikh Abdul Wahid Yahya Reneganon has helped this. But the last advice would be that although we need to purify our confusions, philosophical, and rediscover the consistency of an orthodox traditional grammar, at the end, let us be very careful, as the masters invite us, not to go too far with an intellectual approach, because at the end we need to be helped by an intellectual help, but the spiritual knowledge needs us to be simple, purified, open and empty to his presence, to his peace. And so this is something which is very important and very difficult. But the combination of an intellectual clarification and purification and the priority for sacred knowledge and service and being consistent with religion as Sharia and as Islam teaches, and with the support of being faqr, of being faqir, might actually be a good combination, inshallah. So thank you very much, Abu Sufyan, and thanks to all the brothers and sisters that were so kind and generous to challenge my ignorance with some good questions. Very much so.
Astaghfirullah. Thank you so much, Shaykh. May Allah bless you for your generosity in sharing your knowledge. It's always a joy to have you, and we're always trying to keep up with you. And inshallah, we're learning as much as we can. Shaykh, would you kindly help us with a closing dua, Shaykh?
Thank you. I'll be repeating the dua I mentioned last time, because this is a powerful prayer that, of course, in Singapore and in Southeast Asia is well known and practiced. So I'll be repeating this Salat al-Azimiyya. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma inni as'aluka bi nuri wajhi Allahi al-azim alladhi mala arkana arshi Allahi al-azim وقامت به أولم الله العظيم أن تصلي على مولانا محمد ذي القادر العظيم وعلى آل نبي الله العظيم بقدر عظمة ذات الله العظيم في كل لمحة ونفس عدد ما في علم الله العظيم صلاة دائمة بدوام الله العظيم تعظيما لحقك يا مولانا يا محمد يا ذا الخلوق العظيم وسلم عليه وعلى آله مثل ذلك واجمع بيني وبينه كما جمعت بين الروح والنفس زاهرا وباتنا يكازة ومناما واجعله يا رب روحا لذات من جميع وجوه في الدنيا وقبل الآخرة يا عظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and thank you so much again.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Thank you, Shaykh, for your time. May Allah bless you. Inshallah, till next time.
Thank you.
Inshallah. Take care, Shaykh. Bismillah. All right, Alhamdulillah, that was yet another very insightful and very beautiful session with the scholars of South Lahi. That was Shaykh Yahya Pallavicini on the topic of Marifa, the doctrine of knowledge. Very insightful lecture, and we hope that you've benefited from it, inshallah. Inshallah, do check out social media on South Lahi's Instagram and Facebook for our other Facebook lives and also our programs, and as well we still have the Korban application open right now. I believe the closing date is on the 16th of July. So if you are keen to do Korban in Senegal, do check out the link bit.ly/Africa Korban, bit.ly/Africa Korban, and please check out our social media for all the programs that's coming soon, inshallah, throughout the week. And we hope that you pray for us and our volunteers and our directors, of course. And with that, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.